Greetings and happy 2024, you intrepid Herle Burlyites. It's been about 3 weeks since we were last on here. 3 glorious rum and coke soaked weeks, and god damn it, I've missed you people. But we're coming back strong with our first show of the year because of the history and political perspective we're going to get over the next 60 minutes or so. Former multi-portfolio cabinet minister and over quarter-century member of parliament, Carolyn Bennett, is our guest. Ms. Bennett is political wonder, winner of 9 straight elections in Toronto St. Paul's, family physician by training, the first ever Minister of Public Health. She led the establishment of the Public Health Agency of Canada and appointed our first public health officer. She was appointed Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs in 2015, then Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations, and in 2021, Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and Associate Minister of Health. Ms. Bennett announced her retirement from public life just about a month ago. So today on the Herle Burly, the Carolyn Bennett exit interview. We're going to talk about the evolution of the Liberal Party over close to 30 years, where the country's at on Indigenous relations and how that's changed. Similarly, healthcare, public health, mental health, and addictions for sure. Carolyn, it's a pleasure and an honor for me to do this with you today. Thank you for agreeing to come on the show.
Well, it's great, and it's just everything you're doing, David, is really, really important in terms of people understanding the human face of our democracy.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we're trying to engage people at kind of a deeper level here into politics, and this kind of conversation is exactly what works. So listen, before you got into politics, you were a doctor. You were the kind of doctor who delivered babies. You brought 4 of John and Beth Webster's children into this world, for God's sake. Did you like being a doctor?
I loved it. I mean, it really is you're there with people at their best and their worst, and it is, you really do feel the partnership. And I still think that the have and have not in our health and healthcare system is whether people have a family doctor or a primary care provider that will fight for them and get them what they need when they need it.
Right. Why is it difficult for us to accomplish that?
I think I'm very worried about family medicine now. I'm very worried that kids aren't choosing it. I think it's hard to be a generalist. I think that it somehow is, even in medical school, people are persuaded that it's more important to know more and more about less and less. And that being a generalist is really hard. I remember once going to a meeting about creating generalists, and Peter sort of put me on the train and said, remember, Carolyn, in the Army, generals are called generals because they're generalists. And I remember Adrienne Clarkson, whose daughter is a family doctor, at the 50th anniversary of the College of Family Medicine said, you wouldn't let the place kicker call the plays. And right. And I think it is, as family medicine, really important that we know the system. The respect I've always had. The patient knows their body best. We know the system. We know what's missing or what they need, and I hope we can do more. I'm very impressed with the Foundation for the Advancement of Family Medicine. I think that those are areas where I'm very interested in continuing.
Really? Like what? Doing what?
Well, just trying to figure out how do we change medical school training so that kids want to be a family doctor? How do we get the people from small communities in that a lot of the city dwellers don't want to work in small towns, although if they try it, they like it. But I just think that we've got to have a much longer range approach to the importance of working on teams. And I think that's what we were trying to do in my practice, is bring on the physio, the chiropractor. We would have loved a social worker that this is a team sport that I remember before I even ran federally to be testifying at Queen's Park about how team-based care was the way we had to go forward so that everybody does what they're good at and patients get their needs met in a timely fashion in those the most appropriate care by the most appropriate person at the most appropriate time. So it is it's a challenge going forward, but I think we're up to it.
You're saying there's a hierarchy that's developed in medicine where if you end up being a family doctor, you're kind of a failure because you really should have been a specialist? Is that what's happening?
I think there is that kind of judgment. Yeah. I mean, I think that all the way through medical school, what happens is the cases are what the family doctor missed. And I think that, as we look at going forward at Indigenous physicians, how do we make them comfortable that they will be well supported to work in their communities when it is, that it's hospital-based care and those are the ways people are trained. And we had hoped with the new Northern Medical School in Prince George and Sudbury, Thunder Bay, but we don't seem to be able to attract the Indigenous students we need, and I think somehow this team-based care approach is appealing to now the current students, and I hope the future students.
Interesting. You mentioned Peter. You have a powerhouse husband. You guys are a power couple. You don't have some trophy guy around on your arm. Peter is Peter used to be for a long time the head of TVO, right?
Yeah, and I mean, part of that was because, of course, he was one in that. Yesterday we had lunch with Chalmers Adams, who was one of the first film lawyers, and Peter and Chalmers were at the beginning of trying to create a screen of our own, and so from The Gray Fox to My American Cousin to One Magic Christmas, John the Missus with Gordon Pinson, Peter was part of helping filmmakers tell our stories. And so it was pretty amazing on Sunday night, looking at the Beverly Hilton and the Golden Globes to think it was 40 years ago that we were there because The Gray Fox had been nominated with and Richard Farnsworth.
Cool. He's a great guy, I might just say.
Well, and I think I told in my last speech at the House of Commons, I said, he made the mistake when he was graduating from Emerson College in Boston. His bucket list said support a politician, but I'm not sure he thought that this would be it. And we told the story of one of my first canvasses. He was down the street here and did the usual thing, David. Would you like to meet the candidate? And the person at the door said, "I'd rather have my eyeballs taken out with fish hooks." So ever since then,
Undecided.
Ever since then, he's done signs, and occasionally, people do stop and say nice things, but sometimes not.
Exactly. So it's the mid-1990s. You ran provincially first and then federally. Why did you decide to get into politics? You've got a medical practice. You have some influence in the profession, and are helping to advance healthcare policy. All of a sudden, you decide you want to be an elected politician. Why?
Well, I don't think I decided. I think they came after me after the Liberal Party came after me after we had done the fight for Women's College Hospital. And so, I said at the time, I don't know anything about politics. And they said, well, that just fight for Women's College, that was politics. And I went, oh, really? And so I think it was, I used to say that, the system became my patient. Right. That this was what was that about, and I think I ran provincially to try and fix the healthcare system. But when I was asked by Barry Campbell to run federally, Peter and I had a chat about it, and I thought, well, the things I really care about how do you keep people well, not just patch them up when they get sick, which was the sort of Tommy Douglas. And Mark Lalonde on the social determinants of health. I realized that, a lot of the levers we have, not just sending the province's money for health and healthcare, but poverty, violence, the environment, shelter, equity, education. all of those things were the sustainable approach to making sure that you could decrease the demand side. Well, because the supply side was never going to be able to catch up if we didn't do things differently. And if you just really do wait for people to get sick and patch them up, that it's too late. And I think that's where I became very involved with the Indigenous approach to the medicine wheel instead of the medical model. The medical model really taught us to just wait for people to get sick and run a repair shop. That life cycle approach of Indigenous, the medicine wheel, keeping people well mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually throughout the life cycle just seemed to make more sense. And I think that, through that time during SARS, where we knew, that it would be better not to get it. We didn't have any treatment. We didn't know how it was transmitted. We didn't know any of that. And then to set up really what the Naylor Committee, David Naylor, has suggested in a public health agency, the first public health, as you said, it became clear that, and I remember when Paul Martin asked me to do this job, I said, it just can't be infectious disease. We actually have to do poverty, violence, environment, shelter, equity, education. We have to do all of it in preventing chronic diseases. But it was
infectious disease that had him motivated on that file, because he was worried about something like COVID back then.
Yeah, and I mean, he and his dad around polio. I think that there were so many sort of lines, paths to public health. And we had sat in rooms, that year of 2003, where, the same 200 people had been worrying about public health for the last 20 years. Nobody had ever done anything. It was the absolute sort of poor sister in health and healthcare. We used to, when I did the roundtables around setting up the agency, people talked about the sort of tyranny of the acute. The acute, there'll always be a surgeon stamping his feet saying, if I don't get a new gamma knife, people will die. When probably 3 more public health nurses or there would be a way of actually keeping people well.
But that's an aggregate effect, not an individual effect. And so I've done years of polling on this, and my sense of the public mood, Minister, is that Canadians believe a lot in public health and social determinants of health and think those are really worthy priorities to be working on. Additionally, not at the expense of whether somebody's there to put a stent in if I need one. Right?
Absolutely. And I think that, even with the Paul Martin government, we needed the wait time czar. We needed to make sure, because that, at that pointy part of are you getting what you need when you need it, is really the stories we all tell at Christmas dinner, or when one of our loved ones is in trouble. And I think that most people know, David, that if you're really sick in this country, you get really good care. The worried well are, from the day I did my residency in family medicine, we always knew that those were that was a group that you had to deal with properly. In a real way. And when I was an examiner in the College of Family Medicine, if you just dismiss somebody, they would go 5 other places to find out whether they had cancer or whether, what was going on, even if you brilliantly diagnosed the diabetes. So you had to ask people, and and that's why having properly trained family physicians and nurse practitioners to actually be that partner with a patient, but also be the person on the phone with the pester power, saying this is a patient I'm really worried about, and they need to be seen.
Let me run a personal example by you. I just had a cataract removed on my eye, the Kensington Eye Clinic, right? So my cataract was diagnosed by my optometrist in August. I saw a specialist in October, and the cataract was removed in mid-December. In terms of responsiveness of the system, would you consider that to be good, okay, or bad?
It's good.
I think it's good.
Yeah.
All right, let's get back to politics. Your early times, which is St. Paul's it used to be considered a bellwether riding, but in reality now it's a pretty safe riding. And certainly in 1997, with no Conservative Party really in existence, and those majorities Mr. Kretschmer was winning in Ontario, it must have been a very highly sought after nomination. How did you win the nomination?
I was acclaimed.
Get out. Get out.
Yeah. No, it was very interesting because it was a bellwether riding.
How civil? How did that happen?
Well, Barry Campbell had asked me to run, and I think that in that I'm not sure everybody knew that he wasn't going to run again. And we got out there and we sold some memberships. We raised some money. I had been the candidate provincially, and so I think that the riding association sort of decided to call the meeting, and so it was I just to say that Barbara McDougall had been the member here before. This had been a bellwether from Michener to Ian Wan, Ron Atke, John Roberts, Ron Atke, John Roberts. This was
when there was a progressive Conservative Party.
That is correct.
Right.
And I think that lots of people in this riding thought, if Jean Charest had won the leadership, that this riding would definitely be in play. And I think that, that there is still, the riding has been NDP for two provincial elections. And I think that I think no one should take this riding for granted. Herb Gray left, and Brian Massey has been the member of parliament there for a long time. I just think that we have to take this riding very seriously now.
Right. Were you surprised that it took you 6 years and a change of leadership to get into cabinet?
I think it was good for me. I think, I spent 5 years as the chair of the subcommittee on persons with disabilities. It was very humbling. I chaired Canada Israel for 5 years. I ended up learning a great deal about the importance of parliamentary committees. That subcommittee on persons with disabilities, with the help of Bill Young, who later became the parliamentary librarian, we only had unanimous reports. We could put an asterisk down to even the Bloc would agree that we sort of handpicked the committee, and we traveled. And I think if I hadn't had those kinds of experiences of the importance of members of parliament and caucuses, I don't think I would have been the parliamentarian or the cabinet minister. David Collinette said to me once, because I was having a bit of trouble sitting on the health committee and thinking, oh my God, what are they doing? And I had had trouble, as you remember, David, with the Hep C vote and with a number of other aspects of women's health strategy that made no sense to me. And David Collinette said to me once, you are always going to have trouble with any minister who's never been in the backbench or in opposition. And I think that we look to, when there's a big government change like we've had, you look at the ministers who actually understand the importance of caucus and that temperature taking. But I think with the prime minister now, I'm very excited, that we're getting to a place where good ideas can come from anywhere. Solutions, amendments are accepted. Like it's the opportunity.
What are you referring to under this prime minister?
I think it used to be that any amendment from the opposition would be rejected. Bills came in as a baked cake, and it was a bit late to tell them it needed more cinnamon, or this is, or that some unintended consequence that hadn't been sorted out with the public servants, where there is a way of putting in an amendment and making what committees need to be able to do. And I think under this prime minister that it has been possible as ministers to accept amendments, to accept stuff coming back from the Senate, send it back again, that it is our responsibility to make the best laws possible for the country, and for us to preempt any unintended consequence of a bill that just missed something.
Right. I was curious about why you said that, because he's not reputed to be particularly close to the caucus.
I think, to see us that night of the pajama party, or the 30 hours of nonsense.
Was that a bit of a turning point?
I think it's been before. I think at caucus, I think when, it is just about, he's really there for us and knows how important caucus is. He has been in opposition. He does understand. And I think that really shines through when he is there voting with us all night, and is prepared to listen when someone is struggling, or understands that they really are, unable to vote with us, or the vote the way that the government would have preferred. He's I think of, people aren't thrown out of caucus. People aren't,
not recently.
No, well, that was caucus's decision, if people will recall. The prime minister gave the decision to the caucus.
Right. Happy New Year, you glorious Herle Burlyites and accursed. I'm sure a bunch of our listeners have made resolutions for 2024. It's what people do as the calendar turns, eh? They make a few changes, or try to. But maybe not shockingly, I'm going against the grain, taking my inspiration from Stuart Smalley on SNL in the mid-'80s. Google it if you don't know. I like me, you like me, so doggone it, I'm going to keep doing me. You all know TELUS, our presenting sponsor, has a similar belief and consistency in how they live their values and social purpose, the core of which has a lot to do with this little maxim: they give where they live. So I want to throw a little light on how TELUS struck up a partnership with a local startup back in 2017 to help them do just that. Benevity is a Calgary-based outfit that creates software to help companies implement their corporate social giving programs with maximum efficiency. Basically, it helps TELUS team members, current and retired, easily track their volunteer hours, create and sign up for volunteer activities, and make donations. On a corporate level, Benevity also enables TELUS's community board grants to charities all over Canada. You know what happens when you have an idea that makes doing good even more powerful? That idea grows. Benevity has exploded to become one of Western Canada's largest startups. From a small room above a local shawarma shop to offices in Calgary, Victoria, Toronto, California, Geneva, and Barcelona. Some of their other customers? Nike, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Apple, Google, and over 900 leading brands around the world. Not too shabby a client list. That's what happens when companies like TELUS and Benevity bring common goals to the table. Good business meeting good purpose to make deeper connections and greater impact around the world. So, COVID. It wasn't your bailiwick when it came along, but as the person that set up the Public Health Agency of Canada, You must have thoughts on how Canada reacted to and handled COVID. I understand that the Public Health Agency was not really in ship shape to manage it when it came along. Not putting that on your doorstep. I'm just putting that as an observation. There'd been 10 years intervening between the time you set it up and when COVID came along or more. So what did you, given what you would have envisioned when you set it up, how did you think that all performed?
Well, I think that what was different this time was that it wasn't just public health, it was public health and the economy. And so there ended up being having to be a cabinet committee, COVID cabinet committee. There needed to be decisions taken that were in the best interests of all Canadians. And I think that Theresa Tam did an amazing job giving the public health advice. I think that Do you? Yeah. No, I really do. I think what happened also, though.
What about those of us who felt we were getting wrong or conflicting advice? Why was I ever told not to wear a mask?
I think because, again, it's sort of like when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do? I don't think we really knew at the time. I don't, my kids were fighting with me about wearing a mask or not. And I was the one going, and then it changed that we really did need to be doing this. I think the other problem that we saw, even coming out of the public health network when we set it up in 2005, was that the public health officers in the different provinces and territories report at different levels. So some of them are reporting somewhere down here and their advice is not taken. And so even if you get a consensus at you may not see that happen in certain provinces and territories. And so I can remember even in H1N1, David arriving in Halifax and seeing 2 full-page ads, one from the federal government, one from the province of Nova Scotia, as to who would be the priority groups for vaccines. 2 conflicting pieces of information. And I think that is what has worried me, is that we, the National Committee on Immunization takes a certain stand that, you have to do this persuasion thing with the provinces and territory that this is the facts and that we actually have to again, and don't forget, this is one of the first times that we've entered into this kind of an infectious disease epidemic with a already firmly fixed anti-vax community, and really got in the way of, and some of the decisions. I mean, I spent my career as a family doctor with vaccine hesitancy. I did that in my office with each worried mom. The pharmacist may not have that relationship, or the arena with well-intentioned doctors and nurses and vaccinators giving the shots. But I think the lack of health literacy, mental health literacy, digital literacy, all of these things that I think we need to be immunizing citizens to know where and how to get the best possible advice.
Right. When you set it up, though, would you have expected that if something like COVID came along, that the country would have thought through long-term care homes and anticipated what to do with long-term care homes? The country would have thought through schools and figured out what you were going to do with schools in such a circumstance. Like, it all seemed to catch every element of the government so off guard. And I thought the Public Health Agency was there to have plans for these kinds of situations.
Well, and I think that you've touched on a very important thing, that those schools and long-term care facilities are totally provincial responsibilities, and we can give the best possible advice. But if they as we learned even during the downsizing with hospitals, that if people can do shift work in 3 different institutions and take their germs with them, that ends up the responsibility of the local public health officer, who probably will not be listened to by some of now what we see as some of the administrators who don't want to have full-time staff. They'd rather have casual staff. They then don't have to pay benefits. And we learned that during the downsizing, with hospitals, and that cost containment model that we know doesn't work. These aren't widgets. We actually have to do what we have to do.
Right. What do you think it was about COVID that kind of fractured our society?
Well, the isolation and I look out here and I have a beautiful bay window with the young girl who had a sign across the window when I miss my friends. And I, you just think of how isolated we all were, how we, I often think that even as a minister, even as an MP, even as just anybody working in the community, I think we all know that where we get really good advice or find consensus is when we get together. I have to tell you that, if I'm going to a conference, I will get in there half an hour early. I'll go to the coffee table. I'll find out what people are saying, what the previous speaker said, what are we up against, who are the players. I don't put that in a Zoom chat box, and I don't pick up the phone afterwards and say, like I should have, what did you mean when you said that, David?
Right.
Whereas in person, I will come up to you after and say, gee, is there something I should be worrying about?
Right.
And I think that we lost all of that. And people were just on their own, and they felt on their own. And then we ended up with, like I can remember going when we were allowed to, or going across to the Chinese grocer, with my gloves and my mask. And the day that the provincial government decided to close the parks, and the young woman there with a 3-year-old living on the 17th floor somewhere was just in tears, like, what am I going to do? And I think some of those decisions that didn't seem to reflect the facts or people's need to get out there and be able to walk and get to a park or it just seemed that people weren't listening.
Right. Okay. So from one intractable problem to another, when the Prime Minister made you the Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations, I don't know really that he could have bestowed a higher honor on you, because it was clearly one of his biggest priorities of his government. And he said those things, and he's backed that up, in my view, with money and action on a variety of fronts, that repairing that relationship, the reconciliation, was an enormous priority of his. How do you think that's gone?
Well, I think that, when I see the orange shirts, when I see, the land acknowledgements, when I see people wanting to talk to me about how it's going, and when I see my friends, when I think of all the new friends that I've made who've been such great teachers, but, from berry picking with Mary Simon to the amazing Maria Campbell to Sylvia Maracle, like the people, my friends, Cynthia Wesley Eskimo and Steve Copty, they can see that there's a big change. I think governments have a lot to account for, decades, if not centuries. This isn't going to be overnight. But I think, as you say, the hockey stick of investments, but the respect of letting people know. But I think of Crown-Indigenous Relations, and I mean, two things there, David. One was the Prime Minister wanted to make it clear that every government department had a responsibility, not just the Minister of Indigenous Affairs. And so it became very important that we do this across all government departments, but all jurisdictions as well. But I remember the first meeting of all of the Indigenous leaders and with the Prime Minister, and Natan Obid said to the Prime Minister, "Who designed this agenda? Who decide what we're talking about? This doesn't feel like a partnership to me." And I think that's what I keep saying. It needs to feel like a partnership if we're going to go forward in a real way. And I think that it is about a reset in terms of that ability of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis setting their own goals. Our job is to support them in what they want to do. It isn't no more of this father knows best stuff. I mean, all of the mistakes that we made as settlers showing up here, we're now coming to reap the damage of not thinking 7 generations out in terms of the environment, the medicine wheel instead of the medical model, all of these things, listening to women, putting children first, the pedagogy of learning by doing. We put these kids in stupid little boxes in tiny little rows, copying off a blackboard instead of being out on the land, learning physics by getting their canoe to go forward in a wind, or dressing a moose, cleaning a fish to be the brain of a deer to tan a hide. That's chemistry. And we arrived thinking that they were uneducated. And I think the most important thing for me, of course, is the concept of leadership, which is asking, not telling. And I think that we are doing that better, that asking, is there a consensus? How can we help? And I think that has been hugely important to me. It changed my life. I know when Bob Ray asked me which critic position I wanted, I think I surprised him by picking his favorite. And then when the Prime Minister asked me to do the job, I sort of burst into tears, thinking, "Oh my gosh, right. Yeah."
Well, such a big job. Some of the money that is going out, especially through things like Cindy Blackstock's court case and settlement, the $40 billion, looks to me like reparations. Are we paying reparations without calling it that?
That's a very good question. I think there's a lot of questions like that'll be historians and experts will make that call much later than I can. I think when you see really whether it's 60 Scoop or whether it's really some of the young people that I've talked to, I think my concern was there were some people that didn't even know they'd been in care, others that were in 10 different homes, abused in 6 of them. When we looked at the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in those hearings, I mean, the attachment to the child welfare system was almost always there in either the victim or the perpetrator or both.
I want to talk for a minute about an unsexy, plain brown, unprepossessing thing that has nonetheless managed to acquire iconic status in the Canadian institutional memory: the railroad boxcar. We've all seen them at some point, usually so many bolted together behind a locomotive that you can't see the end of the train. Every kid on the prairies, and quite a few elsewhere in Canada, has squirmed in the back seat of the family sedan at a rail crossing, watching a solid wall of those rectangular brown cuboids, yes, that's the geometric term, clicking by for what seemed like forever. Boxcars have looked basically the same for nearly 200 years. That timelessness has made them famous. Bandits chased them in westerns. Hobos jumped onto them in the 30s. Stuntmen leaped out of their sliding doors in movies, and over the decades, they transported just about everything everywhere. Our sponsor, CN, operated wooden boxcars during the company's early years, 30,000 of them at one point. They were eventually ruled fire hazards and phased out. In the 50s, the railway began using steel boxcars. One particular fleet was nicknamed Buffalo Cars because of the Manitoba buffalo image each one displayed. They were originally used to move newsprint, then modified to haul grain to Churchill and Thunder Bay. The arrival of specialized hopper cars in the second half of the last century removed the grain mission from boxcars, but they remain in use for just about everything else. Modern boxcars are bigger and more sophisticated, often refrigerated or cushioned. A few years ago, CN ordered 800 new ones, 60 feet long, high capacity, and yes, still brown. It might seem a little counterintuitive to be spending millions expanding capacity like that in a period of economic uncertainty. But CN believes that constant reinvestment in the railroad, regardless of the economic cycle, is wise. Massive disruptions to supply chains in Europe and Asia have put pressure on Canadian producers. And governments in North America are talking a lot about nearshoring, and there's a shortage of truckers. So CN needed more boxcars for forest products, or metals, or minerals, or auto parts, or bagged agricultural products, or whatever. Because, as I've said here a few times, cargo has to move, and boxcars just keep rolling. So, it's been a big priority of the government. A lot of money's been spent. I don't know that many Canadians have seen a difference from their vantage point in the situation. The polling evidence, scant as it is, says that Indigenous voters themselves are unimpressed. So what are the accomplishments on the Indigenous reconciliation file that you'd like to highlight?
So I think, some of the land claim agreements are fantastic. And again, for us to be able to deal with the Williams Treaty or deal with, so many of these things that were so long standing. And I think that's the other thing, David, that so many things are very, very long standing, and that we end up, I had a binder this big of all the outstanding land claims, and twice a year we'd go through it and figure out which were the ones that we could get really past the goalposts, and it is but I hope that it is about the leadership that's coming up. It's the young people. It's, my relationship for 20 years with the Indigenous Physicians Association. The idea that there would be this ability to look after themselves. How are we measuring how many Indigenous teachers that when you're at Siksika and 80% of the teachers in that school are from the community? Like, this is so important. And it also is that what can be learned from this to others, the importance of secure personal cultural identity. Is somebody proud of who they are? That's your resilience, your self-esteem. That's how it is. And was mornings where, at the sunrise ceremony where you just start to see light, and there'd be a young man with strong, proud Indigenous on his sleeve. Like that, to me, that is what's coming. And we, it's exciting to have been part of it, but we know it's baby steps in the right direction. But I think what is happening now is that people understand, like happened in 2006 with Kelowna, kids, Kyoto, that if people say nothing happened, a future government could roll it all back, and we would be in big trouble as a country. And so I think when we look to baby steps in the right direction, we've been so busy doing it that I think we've not done a good job communicating it. But our partners are a bit reluctant to say yay, because there's still so much to do. And so it is, I think, really important for us to be patient, and when First Nations, Inuit, and Métis are able to say there's been big change, then they will say so. I think the Métis have been very pleased at the government being able to take their rights and UNDRIP and charter rights, or Indigenous rights seriously, and I think that we've got a long way to go, but I'm proud that I was part of the listening that was so necessary in terms of being able to help in a way that they want to be helped.
Can we get practical for just a second? Yeah. Which is the most common thing that gets thrown back at the government is that it promised to eliminate boil water advisories on all boil water advisories in the country, and it's only eliminated most of them, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing that gets thrown at. You said you would do this 8 years ago, and you haven't done it yet.
I think can you explain
to me practically why any single reserve in the country can't have clean water? There must be a reason, because I know that you would have wanted to do this if you could. So I would just like to know what the reason is.
Yeah, I think that there are every single community has a plan now, and it
has a plant, a water filtration plant.
Okay. A plan.
A plan.
Yeah. So the plant is one thing, but where you get the water from, like say, there's communities where there's uranium in the water, but also for the local town. There's places where you can't really drill any more wells, but there is concern about taking the water out of the lake. We actually, there needs to be the feasibility, then the design, then all of these. There is sometimes differences of opinion as to which is the right way to go, and our job is to help people do what they need to do. And so it is. Some have been slower than anybody would have liked, but no one made that commitment before, and we are well on the way to doing this, because it is unacceptable, and it's unacceptable to have 17 people living in one house. We've moved very hard, on housing, but also being able to have the skills and the training so that people are doing these things themselves. To see the young water operator with his uniform there, keeping his water, to me that, it just makes you smile to be there, seeing these young people aspiring to be able to work in their community and help their community.
Right. In terms of the durability of this action, Carolyn, my experience has told me, democracies aren't very patient with things, point number one, which is why I think that the model, which suited itself to a deficit reduction plan that Paul had in the mid-90s of, here's the problem, here are the things I'm going to do, and the problem will be solved by X date, and I'm going to report up to you. So clear end date to this issue, right? We're going to have solved it by then. When I asked this question to Mark Miller too, is reconciliation a never-ending project, or is there some point at which we all are just good with each other?
Reconciliation is a journey. It's not a destination. It is actually working together, forever in that sort of peaceful coexistence, and being able to respect the rights of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis to to make their own decisions. And I think that we need to just, this is about walking together. It is like the two-row wampum, or this is about us going forward together and learning from one another. And I think it, as I said, in health and healthcare or in any of these things, it's time we listen to them, and that we've made a lot of mistakes.
Fair enough, but let me be an asshole for a second.
Okay.
How many generations past me are going to be called settlers and colonizers?
Well, I think the first peoples will always be the first peoples.
So we're always going to be settlers and colonizers.
I think that the appropriate history of Turtle Island, where people showed up and decided terra nullius. If you weren't a Catholic, you weren't a human. There's a history there.
Yes.
That means that somebody said something about my both sets of grandparents came here in the early 1900s from England. This is that's the beauty of Canada, is that there are the first peoples, and then there are the people who came from somewhere else, and with their skills.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like settler and colonizer have negative connotations to them.
And people saying, well, that wasn't me, it was my grandfather or my great grandfather or whatever. But maybe there'll be other words that we'll use, partners, I just think that the first peoples are the first peoples. And, you think of, the Franklin expedition and you think, oh my word, that, how long did it take them to ask the Inuit to help them find those boats? And there was at the installation, the Franklin exhibit, there was this one sound piece, David, that you pushed it, and there was this old voice of a great grandfather or something saying, and their hats weren't attached to their coats. and said it about 3 times. And these cloth coats, and they went out, and I just think that this is about humility and about a reckoning for the mistakes that were made, and embracing of what it feels like to have new friends who are in touch with their language and culture and are so proud. It's like in my speech, I thanked my French teachers in Quebec City, because until you live there with people and have people who absolutely la beauté de leur langue, it is, you don't get it. And I think that it is about French and English and Indigenous and what we used to write on the cabin walls at Camp Champlain slept here. We actually have there is a sensibility, but I think we still have to admit that the superiority complex of the colonizers was very, very wrong.
Right. Okay. Your last gig in the government was really kind of an unchallenging area of mental health and addictions. And there's nothing going on in the country with respect to that. Since COVID happened, I have done a lot more research into people's mindsets and what they're feeling in terms of their personal experiences and lives. And the amount of mental health issues, depression, anxiety out there has shocked me. The number of Canadians who will admit to a pollster that they are grappling with mental health problems.
I think that's good. I think because I think it means the stigma's coming down. And I think a lot of people were suffering in silence, embarrassed, and not getting help. So one of the things we think, has been, sort of a result of COVID is that stigma really is coming down, and that people are prepared to say that they're struggling, because everybody was struggling in a different way. Lots of people saying were using more alcohol or more substances, and they admit together that they'd like to cut back on that. That I just think, you can't, you can't manage anything if people won't say it out loud. And I think that people being able to seek help, and for us to find different ways of seeking help. When we set up, or when Minister Hajdu set up the Wellness Together website where people could look and see, but also get 24/7 care. I think the advantage also of COVID has been virtual health, that people can actually get online with individual care or a group, that there's or somebody in their own language from a different
How easy is that
place.
to access? How easy is that to access, Carolyn? Like, if I sprain my ankle, I know exactly what to do. If I'm feeling unsettled or blue, what do I do?
Well, I think that, the Kids Health Phone is doing the most amazing things for kids. And now we're sort of seeing kids, with what we're doing on integrated youth services, coast to coast to coast, it really has skyrocketed in what the kids 12 to 25, and being able to have a peer person welcome them, a primary care physician, social worker, psychologist. So we're really, there's a movement around youth. I think the Canadian Mental Health Association, you can call and you will get an appointment. It won't be tomorrow, like you said with your cataract, but but I think for us to be able to move to more team-based care, as we say, the most appropriate care in the most appropriate place by the most appropriate person, the most appropriate time. So like say at Women's College, Simon Vigod did a study, 40 perinatal mental health. We know this is a big problem with women postpartum, and of the 40 in her intake, only 2 needed to see the super specialized perinatal psychiatrist. Everybody else. So we talk about stepped care. You go from, the peer counselor to the family doctor with extra help, maybe, extra supports up. But then we have to be able to step down the care such that people are able to have people check in on them, those kinds of things, on their way back down. So I think that, with the Wellness Together app, and which is part of Kids Health Phone's part of that, there is an ability to talk to somebody right away and text, David. I was quite surprised to see how much is texting, and how satisfied young people feel. One of the other things that's been really interesting in the change is young people don't seem to care as much about privacy. So they have everything out there. So the Integrated Youth Services has done very well by saying, David, I see you were in Emerge on Friday night. How's it going? And that there's an integration of the kind of care that I think will, I almost think if we could get Integrated Youth Services right, and the work that CAMH is doing, and the work that the Canadian Institutes on Health Research and the Mental Health Institute, we're going to show that this model works. One of my friends, Karen Breek, who's was a physician for the snowbirds, she always says, if they had this for the Integrated Youth Services, why don't we have this for veterans? I think that this kind of integrated care is going to be the future, and it will be team-based, and it will be, timely. But I think that we are, we're getting there. But again, obviously we are also hugely worried about the opioid
Well, let's go there.
crisis. Okay.
Let's go there, because Poilievre appears to really disagree with you on how to handle addictions. And it appears it might actually be an issue in the election campaign. I have to admit, as a person that knows nothing about it, giving addicts free access to what they're addicted to doesn't seem like the most intuitive approach. What does he and I not get about this?
He says we don't give alcohol to alcoholics. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We have had managed alcohol programs for a very long time. This is instead of somebody being out dying in a snowbank, drinking the hand sanitizer. Like, harm reduction is hugely important, and I think that we need to have ways that people stay alive till they get care. With this poison drug supply, harm reduction has never been more important. I mean, David, people used to say that during AIDS. What are you doing giving condoms and needles and all of that? You're promoting promiscuity or drug use. No, you have to be able to keep people alive and then develop that relationship with somebody who knows their name, somebody who wants them to show up tomorrow, who wants them to stay alive. And that's the long-term approach that the safe supply community has been doing, the harm reduction community. I think when Tony Clement was the Minister of Health and spoke to the Canadian Medical Health Association, how many ever years ago, he started doing the Hippocratic Oath and that we should be ashamed and all of this as physicians in the room. And I remember getting scrummed on the way out. And just out of the top of my head, I said, you cannot help people who are dead.
Right. Okay. You up for a little politics before we wrap up?
Sure.
Right. You've been an elected member of the Liberal Party for over 25 years. You've served under 5 duly elected leaders of the party and some interim ones as well. Maybe you'd rather talk about the interim ones than some of the duly elected ones, but nonetheless, I ask you, what evolution in the Liberal Party have you seen over that period of time?
Well, as you know, David, I ran in the leadership in 2006, and that was a delegated convention, and I figured out partway through that I had no prayer in a delegated convention, and it was, no matter what standing ovation you got, the same 8 people were going to go to convention and decide on who they wanted, because only 8 people could afford to go. And it was, so I think moving to one member, one vote has really helped. I think that we are hopefully being much more engaged, intentional on staying in touch with electors between elections, my democracy between elections. How do you involve people in the policy process? How do you involve people going forward? I think it's we're a big tent, and we are always, aiming to find the policies that help the most people or the people who need them most. And we're not stuck in the ideology of the left or the right. So it's hard, because we do change our mind when the facts change. We actually, have to navigate tough stuff. Tough things are tough. And when people are wedded to an ideology of, all government bad, pox on all their houses, or government can do everything, and the federal government can do everything, and we don't even have provinces and territories. We actually, as a Liberal Party, I think, are the practical center. It's the reason I'm a Liberal. I just feel more comfortable in a room full of liberals who actually understand the practicalities and as well as the possibilities.
But I might suggest to you that, to my ear, you're describing the Liberal Party you joined more than the Liberal Party you're leaving, because it feels to me like the party has shifted somewhat from a more purely centrist brokerage party to a more ideological left of center party than it was. No?
I don't think that's the way it felt at the cabinet table. I think that if you listen to Chrystia Freeland, I think the last couple of budgets or fall economic statement are very much aware of the guardrails that have to be there, whether that's interest rates or whether it's the banking, the rating organizations. I mean, that's what sent Paul Martin and us into that spiral. But we've been able to manage that, keep our credit rating, be able to now see the interest rates come down. So I think we're still doing good stuff in raising children out of poverty and seniors out of poverty and building houses and bending the curve on climate change. So I think that it may be as an activist government that we are seen that way, but if we lost our credit rating or we ended up with soaring inflation, I think that people would be right to criticize. I think we're proud of helping people, and maybe in terms of our attitude, we'd probably like to be doing more, but there is that reality, that anchor of we can't risk all of that by ignoring those guardrails.
Right. Okay. So why then? What is your theory as to why the polls say the Liberals would lose to the Conservatives pretty badly right now?
Oh, well, I think that this is, with due respect, David, that's certainly, the polls are a moment in time. I found in the by-elections, knocking on doors, that people were pretty positive, and so whether it's Mississauga or Woodstock, it has been people, I think, want to vent, but I also think that they don't want to risk everything with this not worth the risk guy. So I hope that that with just steady as she goes, that we will be able to earn back the trust. I think Chrystia Freeland used to, I think at the St. Andrews caucus, talked about we're on a portage, and there's going to be mosquitoes and branches in our faces and all kinds of things, but we can see the lake, right. And I think I can see the lake.
Okay. What do you know about Poilievre? What do you think? What do you think his weaknesses are that could be exploited in a campaign?
Well, that's more your job than mine.
You've watched him though. You know him.
I think he's got a very thin skin. I think he, and at times he just can't help himself go below the belt, which I don't think Canadians like.
I hear you on that. Interesting. So, hey, what's your next gig? What are you going to do now?
Well, stay tuned for Chapter 3.
Right.
This is.
I don't suspect you're going to spend it golfing.
No, that's no. Peter. Peter would do that, but stay tuned. I'm.
Oh, do you have something you're going to announce?
We'll see. This has been at the meantime. I'm just wanting to thank everybody that's helped me do this, and being able to just say, we'll still going to need your help.
Awesome. Okay. Well, listen, I want to thank you for 25 years of public service to Canada and for the most genuine, well-motivated public service possible, because I know you well. And I also want to thank you and Peter for 25 years of friendship. And I hope that now that you're not a minister, we'll be able to grab a drink together.
That'll be great.
Great. Thanks for coming on the show. I got to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail. All the Herle Burlyites who watch or listen to this show. We'll be back next week with more of the Herle Burly. But thank you, Carolyn Bennett.
Thank you.
Herle Burly.